All right, let's dive into a really fascinating idea, one that comes from the writer Aldous Huxley. He called it the highest common factor of all the world's religions and philosophies. We're going to explore this idea of a single, universal truth that might just be hiding in plain sight.
So let me just start with a big question. What if, underneath all the different rituals and stories and doctrines, there was one single profound insight about reality and our place in it? An idea so fundamental that it just keeps popping up again and again across all of human history.
Well, it turns out this universal idea actually has a name. Aldous Huxley, the writer I just mentioned, he called it the Perennial Philosophy. He saw it as this timeless, universal system of thought that just keeps bubbling up in different cultures, all pointing toward the exact same understanding of the divine.
So what is it exactly? Well, Huxley's definition has three parts. First, it's a metaphysic. It sees a divine reality as the foundation of, well, everything. Second, it's a psychology. It says there's a spark of that same divine reality inside each of us. And third, it's an ethic. It tells us our ultimate purpose is to know this divine ground of all being. Let's just break those three pillars down real quick. First, metaphysics. This is about the fabric of reality itself, the idea of a single divine source for everything we experience. Second, psychology. This brings it right home to us, suggesting our own soul, our consciousness, has a direct line to that source. And finally, ethics. This gives us our purpose, to realize that connection, to really experience it. Okay, so that all sounds pretty big, pretty abstract, right? So how does someone actually know this divine reality? Well, Huxley argues it's not just about thinking or reading a book. It all hinges on this fundamental principle. Who you are directly determines what you can know. And this is it. This is the absolute core of the whole thing, summed up in one powerful phrase. Knowledge is a function of being. This is the key that unlocks everything else. It means that it's not just about what you learn, it's about who you are. If you change the state of the knower, if you change yourself, you fundamentally change what you are capable of knowing.
Huxley gives us a really simple example. Just think about the difference between a child and an adult. A kid's way of knowing is so immediate, so intuitive. But as we grow up, our being changes. We get all this conceptual, systematic knowledge, but we often lose that direct gut feeling, that intuition. Our knowledge changed because our being changed.
Or check out his second analogy. An astronomer just looking up at the sky with their own eyes has one kind of knowledge. But give that same person a powerful telescope and their being is totally transformed. They kind of become a superhuman, and their knowledge of the universe just explodes. The instrument changed the knower, and that changed what could be known.
So, if a telescope can change our being, what are the instruments for spiritual knowledge? This brings us to a really crucial distinction that Huxley makes between two totally different ways of knowing. This slide lays it all out perfectly. On one side, you've got what Indian scripture calls Smriti, which is basically secondhand knowledge. This is the world of philosophers and writers. They build theories, they make arguments, and their authority comes from other people's work. But on the other side, you have Shruti, first-hand knowledge. This is the domain of saints and sages, people who have a direct perception of reality. Their knowledge isn't a theory, it's self-validating. It's as real as seeing the sun in the sky.
So the big question is, right? How does someone go from being just a thinker to becoming a seer? Well, according to Huxley and all these traditions he studied, this kind of first-hand knowledge isn't about luck or just being really smart. It's about meeting some very specific conditions.
And here is the crucial insight. The perennial philosophy treats this almost like an empirical fact. It's like, just as you have to follow specific steps in a science experiment to get a result, it argues you have to conduct certain kinds of moral experiments on yourself to directly perceive this divine reality.
And what are these conditions? They aren't intellectual puzzles. They're deep transformations of our character, of our being. And across all these different traditions, the prerequisites are incredibly similar. You have to cultivate love, you have to be pure in heart, and you have to be poor in spirit. Now, purity of heart just means having a single-minded focus, not being pulled in a million directions by selfish desires. And being poor in spirit, that's about deep humility, letting go of the ego that always needs to be right and in control.
The Sufi poet Rumi put it so perfectly. He said, love isn't just a feeling, it's an astrolabe, an instrument used to navigate by the stars. These moral qualities, love, humility, purity, they are the telescopes of the soul. They're what modify our being and allow us to see what was invisible before.
This brings us to what I think is Huxley's most powerful analogy, where he basically frames this whole spiritual journey in the language of science.
We all get this, right? To understand the physical world, you have to do physical experiments. You don't just sit around and theorize about quantum physics, you actually go and build a particle accelerator.
Well, Huxley argues, in the exact same way, to discover the nature of our own minds and their deeper potential, we have to conduct psychological and moral experiments. We have to actually do the work of transforming ourselves.
And this just brilliantly illustrates the whole problem. A theology based only on the everyday experience of an ordinary person is like an astronomy based only on noticing a faint, blurry smudge in the night sky. I mean, you can theorize all you want, but you will never understand what a nebula really is until you look through a telescope. It's the same thing for reality with a capital R.
So, where does all this leave most of us? Let's be honest, fulfilling those conditions sounds like a pretty tall order. Huxley knew this, and his conclusion actually gives us a really practical takeaway.
The reality is, most of us haven't dedicated our entire lives to this. We haven't built that moral astrolabe we need for direct, first-hand perception. For the most part, we're dealing with secondhand information.
But that doesn't mean we're just left in the dark. That secondhand knowledge is actually incredibly valuable. So here's the key takeaway. If we haven't seen for ourselves, the very next best thing is to listen carefully to the reports from those who have. That's the whole point of Scripture, of philosophy, of the writings of the saints. They're like the lab reports from the explorers who actually made the journey. And that leaves us with one last, really challenging question. The Perennial Philosophy suggests that the final frontier of knowledge isn't out there in space, but right here, inside of us. It asks us to seriously consider that maybe, just maybe, the most profound act of discovery begins not with looking outward, but with the radical act of transforming who we are.